Welcome back, everyone. Just a couple of quick reminders before we begin our next session. These sessions will all be available on demand for 6 months, about 24 hours after they air. And don't forget to take a few minutes to check out the Content Hub for additional resources from our event partners and the Partner Connect, where you can also chat with our event partners. Please also feel free to use the chat function on the left to introduce yourself, connect with your peers, and discuss the session in real time. In addition to the chat, if you have any questions for our speaker during the presentations, please post them in the Q&A tab on the left, which is right next to the chat, and we will try to address them during the sessions if possible. And now on to our next session, brought to us by Symmetry RX. It is Perfecting the Drug Sample Supply Chain with Hal Walsh, who's the CEO of Symmetry RX. I'm going to turn it over to Hal.
There are those who go the distance, and there are those who reach well beyond. What is it that separates one from the other? Call it an inherent obsession to outperform. Call it extreme expectation. Call it genius. We call them the overreachers, the rare and often unsung doers who reach farther and have the power to propel one company ahead of others. They're embedded in every vertical of our industry. At the research bench, in manufacturing, in marketing, and you'll find them working through all the possibilities to get trial medication where it needs to be, in patients' hands. People with insights who are hastening the future. At Symmetry RX, making compliance foundational coexists with a restless instinct to challenge the status quo. Our mission is, and will always be, to shorten the time and distance between pharma, physician, and patient, to narrow the adherence gap, to overcome barriers caused by rep and patient access issues to the practice location, to innovate and deliver trial medication programs to all 50 states, and to create an entire ecosystem of trial medication solutions with all the known benefits, to see what others don't see. This is how we reach farther, distance ourselves from the crowd, and bring vision and leadership to effect change. Who are the beneficiaries? Pharma, where healthy revenues fuel discovery. Physicians, who want to contribute to patient health using new technology. And patients, who simply desire a better way to receive the medication they need. There will always be overreachers in our industry, people who by nature are reaching farther, expecting and causing the future to arrive ahead of schedule.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for that nice introduction. This is our second year presenting at Digital Pharma Innovation Week, and we couldn't be more excited. So much of what we presented last year was the roadmap of systems that are completed and going out into launch over the next 3 to 5 months. So we're very excited about it. The systems are all operational. So our subject today for the audience is hastening the future, perfecting the drug sample supply chain. And what we're here about is the bigger picture, and that is medication adherence. Most people know the stats the CDC puts out that there are about 125,000 avoidable deaths in the United States each year related to non-adherence to medication. And the costs to the healthcare system overall have an estimated range of $100 to $300 billion. So we're talking about a big problem. It is so many of the people here, this is their mission in one way or another is to drive that medication adherence for patient care. And we do this through the drug sample and trial medication supply chains is how we approach it. So again, my name is Hal Walsh, and I'm the CEO of Symmetry RX, and I'm very excited to be here. Symmetry RX has a number of platforms that I will show you here on the next slide, just because I speak about them a number of times throughout the presentations, and I just want to give you a sense of it. We have 4 major platforms The top three, starting with ActuateRx down, are all new technology, even if they're, in the case of Sample Center, we're in our fourth generation of that platform. But from the bottom up, as we move closer to the patient, we've got Radius XP, which is a system for generating sample requests that is used by pharma field reps when they're remote from a practice, and used by pharma internal reps who by definition are remote from a practice. With Sample Center, that's in its fourth generation. This new platform is managing drug sample requests at the practice level, which I can tell you the practices are very excited about, and a number of them were involved in our development of the product. We are releasing this summer Drug Sample Manager, and this product goes a long way to perfecting the drug sample supply chain, because it looks at the supply chain differently. It looks at the supply chain from the moment your drugs get to the practice door until they go out to the patient or for disposal. And that integrates with Sample Center. Those are joined together. Although Drug Sampler Manager is a practice subscribed service, and so that makes it a little bit different. And ActuateRx, which is an e-prescribed workflow trial medication system with medication adherence tactics tied to it as well. So those are the four major platforms, and all of these platforms have the capabilities built in them to keep overlap from happening. Overlap against allocations, overlap against patients getting multiple samples where we control that, and important features from a regulatory standpoint. So we decided to approach our development process by listening to all the stakeholders in the marketplace. So we're talking about pharma sales operations, sample operations, marketing, compliance, et cetera, along with health systems, supply chain executives, and their staffs. And we really listened to all the requirements that they put in place. And what prompted us to do this was in our implementation of earlier versions of our Sample Center, when we got to certain health systems, they had disallowed drug sampling. And the teams at those health systems were very gracious in terms of sharing their opinions. And we discovered what are the barriers to health systems offering drug samples. And so these barriers, in a simple terms, are the health systems need to meet state pharmacy board and joint commission requirements for drug sample management. And for those who don't know, Joint Commission is the accreditation organization for health systems and their own practices. They really wanted practice efficiency to make sample requests. They looked at drug samples from an enterprise risk management with respect to potential recalls, which, while rare, do happen even in the area of drug samples. And they wanted enterprise visibility to the drug sample supply chain, which they did not have today. So even where practices were compliant with both state pharmacy boards and Joint Commission accreditation requirements, there was uncertainty about how consistently that was managed at different practice locations. And all of this, though, is in a context of the HCPs really value their pharma sales relationships. Those representatives, they bring a depth of knowledge about their particular brand, and they enter into a discourse with the prescriber, which of course accelerates the learnings about a particular brand. The sales representatives have tremendous resources for supporting patients with respect to out-of-pocket costs, educational materials, and those things. And the practices truly value that. And we really keep that as a top-of-mind thing. So while we're addressing barriers, we're also creating opportunities for connecting the pharma sales and marketing teams back into the practices. So the next what if was, what if we could make samples available for all patient encounter types? obviously a big subject, really has been emerging for a number of years, but COVID-19 really brought it home. And by patient encounter types, what we're talking about is in practice patient encounters, the standard, historical patient encounter. In practice with no sample inventory, and that no sample inventory might be your brand, or the practice might not dispense drug samples in their practice. And then patient remote encounters. And in that patient remote encounter, obviously telemedicine, but some cool emerging technologies that are kind of under that category, but telediagnostics like the MedPod product. And of course, we ship these products to the practice. And for our sample center product, which is an HCP self-serve model, they can actually complete a sample request form for direct-to-patient shipping. And that has some limitations to it, but it's still very important, and we're going to show you why in a minute. Those limitations are that it's allowed under a temporary FDA waiver of part of the PDMA, but the FDA left it up to the states as to whether they actually allowed it in their states. And 21 states affirmatively, yes, you can ship direct to patients under this waiver. Another 7 states that I'm aware of have allowed it with their own state waivers, which my understanding is were not terribly difficult, but that you just have to do the paperwork to get it done. So you have a limit of about 28 states that I'm aware of, and that's about 62% of the US population. And then finally, how else might we do this? We do this in the e-prescribe workflow with medication adherence support services. And we'll talk more about that. That's the ActuateRx platform. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But why is this still important? So SignatureRx did 2 surveys, one in September 2020, right after that temporary allowance was granted. And the question was to prescribers, what % of your patients would benefit from drug sampling? And the answer was 41%. And then fast forward to January 2021, and so the first one was September 2020, second one was January 2021. And really, telemedicine was really, peaking at that point. And we asked, what percentage of patients do you believe would benefit? What percentage of telemedicine patients would benefit from drug sample? And the answer was 39%. And that really made us think. So even though the telemedicine encounters have ebbed, it's still a lot of patients. And we think it's important because 2 studies have produced the result that 30% of patients only fill a prescription if they get a drug sample. And that is regardless of the patient's age, income, or gender. So our back of the envelope math on telemedicine patient encounters today, and that would include no sample practices, is that there's about 36 million patient encounters, and therefore there would be 12 million lost first fills on prescriptions. So it's very important to continue to look at direct-to-patient alternatives, and that is what we have built both into Sample Center under the PMA regulatory vertical and with ActuateRx, which has a touch points on PDMA, but it was really under a different regulatory vertical. Our next what if was, what if we could generate profitable demand in all deciles and practice types? And what we're going to show you here is that we believe that it all starts with the cost to serve. So the profitable demand flows from the cost to serve. And we have 2 categories here. We have pharma through SignatureRx and pharma direct in the purple there. And you can see the pharma direct are much bigger numbers. Well, it's a much bigger lift. Those pharma teams are educating the prescribers, getting into the practice. They have created a variety of marketing campaigns and use a lot of technology from Digital Innovation and the folks in this room. But it's a heavier lift. They are creating demand by educating the prescriber. Our demand is less, but it is extremely important and really brings the return to the expense the pharma takes on a direct basis. And so we have pharma through Symmetry RX. And what we do is we bring consistency of demand capture for your brand, so that that brand is available when the right patient is with the prescriber and they want to sample your brand and write a prescription for your brand. And so our cost to serve, whether it's a standard coupon, whether it's our actually lean or full e-sampling direct to a patient, or whether that sample is dispensed in the practice, all of those things are much lower cost. And so it is, in fact, profitable demand. And I'll show you a little bit of data on that from a small internal study that we did. But we also increase the visibility of your brands, because at this low cost to serve, in combination with our pay for performance model, you can actually create eligibility for every prescriber that prescribes in your therapeutic class. And we did a study for a manufacturer, and we looked at the number of prescribers prescribing that manufacturer's branded drug, and we looked at the total number of prescribers prescribing branded drugs in the therapeutic class, and the difference was about 138,000 prescribers. So I'm sure there's nuances in there, but basically there's 138,000 prescribers that could use samples of that brand for their practice and patients, but they're not eligible. And because our cost to serve is so low and entirely pay for performance, all of a sudden it becomes free to make those prescribers eligible. And we'll talk to you in a couple minutes about how we manage that for sample effectiveness. Our next question is, what if we could shape brand strategy through and growth through unique data insights and integrations? And this is the study that I was going to show you. We are doing this today, and our technology just continues to improve, and accelerating the speed that we can deliver results and insights to your sales, marketing, and sample operations teams. I want to point out to you at this point that Symmetry RX is now the #1 source of sample demand for a top 10 and single brand manufacturers, even exceeding their own sales teams. And I will tell you that this is supported by those organizations. There's no conflict with those reps, even though we never meet the reps, because the entire organization is winning with the new prescriptions that stem from the availability of the samples. And increasingly now we have evidence of our success. And this is the data that I want to show you. So one of our manufacturers sent us a small list, about 1,500 NPIs. And they just said, hey, our feeling on this is that these might be low value prescribers. Do you guys want to take a look at it? And so we did. And we categorized those 1,500 prescribers in basically two groups. Those with what I would call high sample effectiveness or high value based on the estimated revenue to expense ratio. And in this group, those almost 1,000 prescribers in the high category had a 237-to-1 expense ratio, which is extraordinary. And the low group had which about 500 prescribers had a 0.7 revenue to expense ratio, and that is negative. So big disparity between the two. And of course, the decision was made on those low sample effectiveness prescribers that we remove them from eligibility. But this data really made us think. We had just acquired the license to the database to be able to do this work. And it really made us think that we're missing something. We have spent a lot of time with prescribers, setting them up to request drug samples. And I can guarantee you the one thing they don't want is samples that are going to sit around. But the other thing we found is that very often in practices, there's one prescriber that does most, if not all, of the sample requests for drug samples used in their practices. And we thought to ourselves, we just create these new platforms that are managing sample requests and managing samples at the practice level. What if we then look to derive insights about what's going on in the whole practice when we look at sample effectiveness? And while that is a more complex process, we are presenting at Digital Pharma East in October 2nd. And we're going to see if we can't pull a small sampling out of this low and high value groups and see how those estimated revenue to expense ratios change. And that's a little bit tricky. So, we have to work through it and make decisions. We're certain we can't recreate all those practices and deliver a number for you. But next year's presentation will certainly have some evidence about what we're doing and how it's making and how we're able to deliver valuable information back to pharma. So that's just it. New sample, new powerful insights going back to pharma about sample effectiveness. And we're very excited about that capability. The next question was, what if we could eliminate the first fill gaps? I mean, this is in so many ways the penultimate of medication adherence. If the patient doesn't start, they do not move through the whole course of treatment the prescriber has recommended or prescribed for them, the treatment plan, if you will. And we looked at this, and we looked at some previous work our predecessor organization had done, and we developed a service that we call ActuateRx. And ActuateRx, it starts patient adherence in the e-prescribe workflow. It's an eligibility-based program. It is a patient-consented program. And every patient that is eligible and consents will get their first fill of their prescription at no charge. And along with that will come other medication support services. So copay card activation where an activation is required, patient text reminders to fill and take prescriptions, and moving from a program pharmacy to a commercial pharmacy, making sure that transfer of the prescription happens correct. This is super exciting. We have shown through modeling that this, based on statistics of research and the experience of both the pharma brand marketing and ourselves, this models out to grow from the same patient population that originally received the prescription, including all those that were eligible and consented, and those that either were not eligible or had not consented to the program. It grows the revenue from that same group of people 78%. And so as we go through into real life scenarios, we'll continue to measure and monitor that. But with that kind of uptick that's well documented, we're very excited about what we can do for patients and for pharma. So the next thing that we want to talk about, actually, I think we're closing here. And that is to say, we have, in fact, been hastening the future and perfecting the drug sample supply chain, particularly on that practice end, from the moment that shipment of samples is received at the practice to the moment those samples are dispensed or destroyed. We are now tracking that. And so there is 100% visibility to the drug sample supply chain. That part of the visibility does not go back to pharma, but it's very important to the practice, and particularly the more sophisticated process-oriented health systems. And so we've shown you some of the foundation of the works we've done. These platforms are all in launch right now, headed to throughout the rest of this year. I did want to share with you, because we're big about the stakeholders. Signature RX, one of the reasons we're named that is that symmetry means balance. And the balance that we were looking for when we named the company was to deliver on the requirements of all the stakeholders in the process. And that is pharma and their various functional groups, that is health systems and their various functional groups, that is prescribers, and that is patients. And this work goes back several years. When we showed our first version of the fourth generation sample center platform, the reviews we got from a top 10 pharma company were these: nobody is doing this. It gives a lot of value to manufacturers. And then peppered throughout that demo was love it, love it, love it. We have completely changed the thinking and our ability to measure and provide feedback mechanisms to perfect the drug sample supply chain. The top 10 practice owner that we worked with, when we showed them the demo of the first version, by the way, they saw the released version 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they're even more excited. But the quotes I got the first time we showed it were, "I am very excited. This is phenomenal." And this is from a pharmacist who heads practice operations for pharmaceuticals. And I am so thankful. And that last piece, that I am so thankful, was this person was the person we worked with to set the requirements around for health systems and make sure that we had them all. And we had that conversation several years ago, and they could not have been more excited about seeing it come live. So excited that the following week we did a demo for 3 of the directors of quality that between them had responsibility for about 350 practices. And they're looking forward to rolling this out, going through a learning period, and then rolling it out to the broader organization. So we're doing some great things. We tie it all back to pharma. We extend the reach of pharma. And we have created a lot of cool mechanisms to provide feedback to pharma and make the reps and marketing even more successful as you create the demand and we capture the demand. So thank you very much, and I will take any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was very enlightening. Now, I wanted to ask you where you see the future, going with the drug supply chain and sampling. And I know we've seen quite a few changes recently. So I kind of wanted to hear your perspective for the future.
Yeah, I think the direct-to-patient shipment of drug samples, while there's a lot of trepidation because of the temporary nature of the FDA waiver, with the new platform technology we have and the high impact on medication adherence of patients, that it really moves the dial on it. 30% of patients only fill a prescription when they get that sample trial medication. So I think that's the big one, and I think engaging on that keeps your companies ahead of the game.
I was also curious if you thought that, this has been any positive impacts that you could share, maybe that you've heard from patients or prescribers, of how this has been really beneficial to getting these samples much more efficiently and effectively.
Well, I think the results are in the numbers. So we have both large and small organizations where our support of the sales and marketing efforts, we've actually become the largest source of drug sample demand. And for years, going back a lot of years, we've always been the number 2 source of demand, pharma sales teams being highest, and then us. And then number 3 is far, far, far down the list. And as you can see from that sample effectiveness data on prescribers that were questioned as to whether they were high value or low value, that the revenue to expense ratio is just incredible. So I think that answers the question. We do not engage with patients on that question when we operate our ActuateRx platform. It is patient consented, and we will have interaction with them to make sure they're aligned on copays and things of that nature. So we'll learn more then.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all the wonderful data. I really appreciated hearing from you. So I just want to remind everybody this session will be available in 24 hours, and it's available for 6 months if you want to rewatch or catch anything you missed. And we'll be going to our next session shortly, but feel free to go and contact any of our sponsors in Symmetry RX in our partner content hub. They have more resources available there as well. Thank you. We'll see you soon.